Welcome everyone. Welcome to Caspian Policy Center's next webinar. This is our fifth webinar since March on the regional issues. Today at the Caspian Policy Center, we are bringing together high-level regional security policy specialists as well as senior representatives from U.S. Department of Defense and State to discuss the situation in the Caspian region. Specific topics will include sharing experience and best practices in securing borders and societies during the pandemic, facilitating a more effective regional response to transnational challenges and opportunities and need for bolstering regional and broader regional cooperation. With respect to our number of our speakers, I'm gonna cut my remarks short here because I want to give more time to our respectful speakers. First, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Laura Cooper, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, at the U.S. Department of Defense. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I can assure you that even though we are all adjusting to this world of webinars and telework, that in the Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense has not let up one bit on implementing our national defense strategy. And for me, this seminar is actually an opportunity for us to harvest ideas that will better help us implement our national defense strategy, because this region is really central to that strategy. Our cooperation in the Caspian region supports several key national defense strategy objectives: strengthening partnerships for the long-term advancement of U.S. interests, defending the homeland from terrorist attack, and preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Now, I have to admit, my portfolio only includes two of the countries on the Caspian, Azerbaijan and Russia. And obviously the nature of the relationship between the US and both of these countries is extremely different. So today I plan on just focusing my very brief remarks on our security relationship with Baku. But it's true that there are many similarities in terms of the US approach to Azerbaijan and our approach to many of the other countries that are in Russia's shadow, to include those of the South Caucasus, the Western Balkans, and Ukraine. But Azerbaijan specifically, we have to say, plays a strategically important role globally as a source and transit link for Caspian energy resources, and it remains an important strategic partner for the United States. Since 2001, Azerbaijan has provided key ground and air access to Afghanistan, enabling critical logistical support for vital coalition operations. We absolutely recognize the dangerous neighborhood that Azerbaijan is in and the potential cross-border threats Azerbaijan faces, wedged between Iran to the south and Russia to the north, while at the crossroads of Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. There's no shortage of risks to legitimate transit through Azerbaijan and a persistent threat of terrorists, weapons of mass destruction, and illegal narcotics that could seek to enter or travel through this transit corridor. We actually started working with Azerbaijan on maritime security many years ago, prior to the current National Defense Strategy, through the DoD Cooperative Threat WMD Proliferation Prevention Program. And I believe that the region as a whole has benefited from the increased capabilities we've been able to provide through this program. Now, today we're partnering with Azerbaijan on improving their capacity for both border security on the southern border and maritime security on the Caspian. For example, we're providing very practical assistance, things like X-ray screening systems to use at border crossings, and patrol boats and underwater surveillance equipment for maritime domain awareness and security operations. These programs increase Azerbaijan's capability to counter threats to its critical energy infrastructure, which provides a critical alternative to Russian and Iranian energy sources for Western markets. But I want to emphasize, these programs don't just benefit Azerbaijan. They are in the national interest of the United States and other partners in the region. But before I close, I want to touch on the issue that is most preoccupying all of us today, and that's the issue of health security. COVID has reinforced what we already knew, that biological threats and diseases don't recognize borders. With our globally integrated economy, health security risks in one country are risks to the region and to the world. The Department of Defense has been working for years with partners in the Caspian region to cooperatively bolster health security and strengthen preparedness and response capabilities against a threat of this kind. In addition to working to prevent the proliferation of biological weapons, the DoD Biological Threat Reduction Program facilitates the detection and reporting of highly dangerous pathogenic diseases that could affect the readiness and lethality of the US Armed Forces, regardless of whether such outbreaks are naturally occurring, accidental, or intentional. We've provided assistance with personal protective equipment during the COVID crisis, but even prior to this crisis, we were partnering with Azerbaijan and other regional partners on the development of a disease reporting system, as well as with laboratory infrastructure and expertise that's been leveraged in this crisis by the Azerbaijanis as part of their COVID preparedness and response efforts. We also recognize that while we must do all we can to respond to today's crisis, we must continue to focus on setting the foundation for improved security in the future. We have to think not just to today's crisis, but to the future crisis that we may all be confronted with. We must do that cooperatively and in partnership. So again, today, I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's ideas that will allow us to build this vision of partnership in the region and security in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Ms. Laura Cooper. It was excellent insights for us, and thank you for making a keynote today at our panel. I know that we have a lot of participants and a lot of registrations, and from the region and the United States, everybody is tuned in to listen to the thoughts and speeches at this panel, at this important webinar. Now I'd like to turn to our moderator and also a very important speaker for this event, Ambassador Henry Ansher from the US Department of State, for making his remarks and also moderating this important webinar. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great opportunity. You know, there's an old saying that if you walk into a room and you don't know immediately who the dumbest guy in there is, it's you. And in that case, this is me. So I think I'll defer any interesting remarks and move immediately to the smart people. We'll do again 6-minute presentations from each and every one of our panelists, followed by the opportunity for the, let's call them the question and answer panelists to come along. Again, 6 minutes. You'll get a warning at 5 minutes. I do not propose to read out the extensive qualifications of our panelists. Frankly, that would burn up most of the time because they are all so very well qualified. I'm just going to read out a title, and I'll take a point of personal privilege with the first speaker perhaps, but other than that, we'll just read out the title, and it'll be clear, I think, just how well qualified and important it is to hear from these folks today. So with that, their first speaker is Clark Adams from the US Department of Defense, where he is the Director for Central Asia Policy. Clark and I have had the good fortune, well, I've had the good fortune to work with Clark for a period of time, learned a lot from him about Central Asia. He's very much known as Mr. Central Asia in OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So it's a particular pleasure to see Clark still talking about it and still engaged. So with nothing further from me, Clark, we're happy to hear from you, buddy. Thanks.
Henry, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good. Henry, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I think your caution at the beginning, and then turning to me, perhaps that wasn't wasn't the best transition in terms of the cleverest people in the room. So anyway, It's really good to be able to talk with all of you. This is a very important topic. It's one that's very close, very close to my heart. And I think being able to participate in a webinar like this, it's an interesting situation. I love participating in these things in person. I love being able to conduct kind of, the face-to-face defense diplomacy that we do in our business all the time. I like being able to engage with people on the margins of the meetings. So this is kind of, and this thought when I was looking at coming up with my remarks today, I was thinking that, we're finding workarounds. Zoom, Zoom is great, but it's no substitute for the face-to-face discussions. And I was thinking that in the context of security, cooperation, and our engagements with the Central Asia region, that the same dynamic is actually going to be kind of shaping our engagements for at least the next year or two, depending on how long the coronavirus continues to affect the world. As Dasdi Cooper, pointed out in her opening remarks, the department's position on the region has remained unchanged. We view it as a critical component of our logistical access into Afghanistan. We are keen on continuing to be able to build the counterterrorism and border security capabilities of the countries in Central Asia. They are critical roles that we see that serve our national defense strategy, but also serve our longstanding commitment to supporting the sovereignty and independence of the countries in Central Asia and the Caucasus. This has been a central U.S. organizing theme really since these countries gained their independence in the early 1990s. And I can't underscore enough how consistently that concept comes up in every interagency meeting that we ever have, every engagement that we have, our discussions with our colleagues, whether at the White House or the State Department, helping all of the countries in this region maintain their ability to defend themselves, to mind their own borders, to take care of their own population is always the central objective that we have. That being said, the tools that we have right now to advance those interests are kind of limited by COVID. I hope this is temporary. We all do. Diplomacy has always been able to continue using virtual, diplomacy can continue using virtual connections. You can have a lot of diplomatic engagement using virtual face-to-face. But there are limits even to that because, as we all know, the interactions on the margins are often the place where the hard work gets done, and not so much in the formal organized meetings, but it's the face-to-face interactions behind closed doors or standing around the coffee table during the break where things actually start to move. Military engagement, of course, is even more problematic because we can certainly do the defense diplomacy component of it virtually. We can have intermittent senior leader engagements where they can talk to each other virtually. But ultimately, you bump up against physics and geography. And you have to basically, in the military cooperation area, you have to be able to train, to conduct joint exercises. You have to be able to deliver equipment. You have to be able to conduct professional military education, which means inviting students from various countries to the United States to participate in year-long war college type environments and really start building those connections. And ultimately we will start to bump up against some hard limitations. If we can't travel, if we can't maintain a lot of these personal relationships that over time become central to our ability to influence our interests and basically help countries work with us. So I'm concerned about that. The other thing that I am concerned about, I think my time is close to up, is that these connections also are going to be dependent on budgets. I think COVID is posing major economic challenges for pretty much every country on the planet. It means that resources in different nations are going to be plowed into public health and economic restoration, and not so much into the military and security cooperation areas. So we have to pay very close attention to trying our best to maintain the relationships that we have, that we've built over time, to quickly move when we can to reestablish those connections and not leave vacuums where other regional actors can, for instance, take advantage of our inability to be out and moving in the region and engaging, and start to undermine some of the things that we've been working on for the last 25, 30 years. With that, I conclude. Thank you.
Clark, thanks very much for that. And thank you especially for pointing out the consistency of our support for the sovereignty and connectivity, if I can throw in that word, for the states in the region. Their sovereignty and ability to connect with each other form an economic entity or an economic cooperation is critical actually to us. So we continue to maintain that interest. It'll be very interesting, I think, as well as we emerge from COVID, how we go about maintaining and then reestablishing with greater strength. You were quite right to point that out. It's a challenge. I'll use the DoD word rather than problem here. So with that, I'll turn to the next speaker on my list, Mr. Hikmat Hajiev, who is the assistant to the president of Azerbaijan and head of the Department of Foreign Policy Affairs of the presidential administration. And there is a daunting title. Mr. Hajiev, please.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this introduction. I see a lot of familiar faces, and also my good friend Laura Cooper, and warm greetings from Baku, Ambassador Suleymanov, and other friends, and Afghan Nifty, and thank you for organizing this event, and warmest greetings from Baku. And thank you for this possibility to speak about COVID and regional affairs, and including the wider Caspian Sea issues. Actually, when COVID-19 started, and as each country, we were also unprepared in general to understand what is in a COVID, and we also appeal to our partner countries to have at least an exchange of information. But we come to conclusion that no country is prepared for that. Simply, there wasn't a lack of information. Therefore, we have built our own strategy. First of all, national measures, in the meantime, regional measures, and then we have continued with some global initiatives. And COVID also coincided with the chairmanship of Azerbaijan in 5 institutions at the regional level, and also some institutions are covering continents. The first one is about the Turkey Council that brings together Azerbaijan, Turkey, and our Central Asian partners. And Non-Aligned Movement, Traseka, UAM, and Energy Charter. And these 5 institutions coincides with the 2020 Azerbaijan's chairmanship. And Azerbaijan reacted in a very flexible manner to the COVID, and we also understood that without regional response, we will not to address risks and challenges associated with the COVID. And key fundamental issue was here to ensure connectivity and to ensure that East-West corridor is operational. We should also understand that Azerbaijan and our Central Asian partners are landlocked countries. And also all countries all around the world, including in our region, have taken hasty decisions to close their borders. Under such circumstances, keeping the trade open, and keeping all connectivity lines open are crucially important. Therefore, it was my initiative of my president to arrange a webinar summit of the Turkey Council. We claim that it is one of the first organizations during the COVID that managed to work in a quite flexible manner to organize it in a summit at the webinar, at the online format. And the Turkey Council Summit was quite efficient and effective, and all countries that sharing the membership of this institution come to this conclusion at the level of the presidents that keeping Trans-Caspian line and also connectivity between Central Asia, Azerbaijan and Turkey are crucially important. And we also agreed that exchange of knowledge at the medical level, exchange of the medical teams are extremely important. Then we have continued with our yet another initiative that also coincides with Azerbaijan's chairmanship, non-aligned movement. And everybody knows non-aligned movement in the United Nations General Assembly is one of the biggest group, and it actually covers 120 countries. Azerbaijan also initiated to host online summit of the non-alignment movement, particularly dedicated to the COVID and to bring together different continents. And our vision was that without global response, we cannot defeat COVID. Unfortunately, we should all admit the fact that when COVID happened, we haven't seen global initiatives or global leadership to address the challenge of COVID. There was a more inward-looking approach rather than a wider global or regional approaches. And it also means that we should, in the future, look at the institutions that we are sharing membership to raise their effectiveness. But non-aligned movement summit meeting was also quite successful, and we have also managed to create a database to collect the needs and requirements of the member countries so that we can share with the wider donor community. And Azerbaijan also, by virtue of its potential, made a modest contribution to the international efforts, particularly as the WHO, and we have provided financial support, and also via the WHO, we have rendered financial support to certain non-aligned movement countries. And we also, by virtue of our potential, rendered financial or in-kind humanitarian support around 30 countries. And most importantly is the global initiatives. Of course, we would like to see more active role of the United Nations and multilateral diplomacy during such a pandemic year. And with that vision, my president initiated holding special session of the United Nations General Assembly. Just for the information that throughout the entire history of the United Nations, there were just only 30 special sessions. And Azerbaijan's initiative was that to have a specially COVID dedicated session of the United Nations General Assembly. We are thankful to the international community that within a very short period of time, international community supported this initiative. 135 or 140 member countries supported this initiative. Now, formally with special session has already started its operation within the United Nations General Assembly. Unfortunately, Azerbaijan's efforts against COVID also associated with the regional security risks, and particularly provocation that have been perpetrated by Armenia on the border areas of two countries. Because we also supported the initiative of the United Nations General Assembly, United Nations Secretary General about a global peace or global ceasefire during the period of pandemic. But in Tovuz, on the 12th of July, Armenia has launched with military operation against Azerbaijan. We do consider it as an act of military aggression, and also we do consider it as part of Armenia's policy of military occupation against Azerbaijan. But the question is that what were the strategic military objectives of Armenia during this particular time to perpetrate such a military provocation? And particularly in the Tovuz area. For the information that Tovuz region of Azerbaijan is just 30 kilometers away from the major connectivity projects of Azerbaijan, particularly along the east-west route. And it's also 30 or less than 30 kilometers away from the Tanap and Tap project. That's a gas project that delivers Azerbaijan gas to the Turkey and European market. And it's just 30 kilometers away from the Tovuz region. Armenia used a heavy artillery, and they also had a certain intentions to involve third parties, and including the Collective Security Treaty Organization to the conflict. And Azerbaijan also had casualties among the military personnel and among the civilians, but civilians also become a target. But most importantly, this attack has been stopped. And Armenian armed forces retreated, and we ensured security of our border, including the critical energy infrastructure and some other important
Sir,
infrastructure.
I'm so very sorry, but we have a time issue here. So I'll thank you very much for your
Just
your
very
excellent.
final note, with just one sentence, because it's
So
in the
then go ahead, please.
just one sentence.
Go ahead.
But context of the United States strategy for the Central Asia, and also European Union strategy for the Central Asia, we do believe that in that format there is a great potential for further cooperation, particularly when the connectivity projects are involved. Therefore, we suggest to have such a format that already exists at the academic level within the Caspian Policy Center, like Central Asia plus United States plus Azerbaijan. Such kind
Excellent
of format.
idea. Thank you, sir. We
you.
also take note of your extensive leadership in working with regional partners, with the Security Council, and with the non-aligned movement. Clearly the right approach. No respecter of borders when it comes to the virus is absolutely correct. So thank you for that. Next on my calendar, I have Iskander Acabayev, the Executive Director of the Kazakhstan Council on International Relations. Mr. Acabayev, the floor is yours, sir.
Ambassador Ansher, thank you very much for this kind of opportunity. Mr. Hajiyev actually quite rightly mentioned about cooperation that is booming in Central Asia these days. But for a long time, Central Asian region was one of the least connected regions, economically, politically speaking. Even though we share the cultural bonds, Central Asia, from its kind of Soviet past, didn't have much cross-communication between the Central Asian republics. Since 1991, there were several initiatives from Japan, from South Korea, from European Union. Lately, it was an initiative from the United States called C5+1. And usually, traditionally, it was third parties that were promoting the engagement within the region. But recently, with the new trends and political transition, which was happening in Central Asia, there were informal consultative meetings by the head of states. The first one was in Uzbekistan, the second one was in Kazakhstan. The third one in 2020 should have been in Bishkek this year, but I believe due to this kind of postpone, due to the COVID-19 and some technical issues, we still might have this meeting this year. And I believe in online format, but it seemed that there is a positive trend that we understand. There is a great potential for Central Asian cooperation. Still, there is a room for improvement. At least the narrative is going into the right direction. At this stage, I believe what is important is not only improve state-to-state relations, but also promote intra-regional cooperation in terms of the small and medium-sized business, people-to-people exchange, doing some educational projects like Erasmus Mundus, similar to, and you can copy it to Central Asia, where you can bring people, bottom-up approach, where you can bring people to the center of Central Asian cooperation. At the same time, speaking about the US strategy, which was announced this year, we don't see much difference. We see that US has paying attention to the traditional security trends. Out of the 6 points, mainly like third points are belonging to Afghanistan. It's economic side and security side. Other points are focused on sovereignty and Central Asian connectivity, which is really important. Quite interesting that the new strategy points out that it signals to the neighboring countries that sovereignty is really important, and US is going to support Central Asian countries, namely US and China, which are the biggest stakeholders in the region, playing big role in Central Asia, and it's part of the Central Asian multi-factor foreign policy to engage with Moscow and Beijing. Speaking about the cooperation, there are different models which are being proposed towards Central Asia, specifically like ASEAN, Nordic Council, etc. So we're still far away from this kind of political cooperation, but at least economically, culturally, we need to develop the narrative and bring business, small and medium-sized business, to the table, where you can engage people on the broader scale. Speaking about the Russia and China, the US strategy doesn't kind of challenge anything in terms of that, but if you look from the expert-based analysis, the greatest challenge, maybe long-term challenge for US strategy is China, certainly the long-term threat. And it's widely accepted by the US experts and China experts, because like US-China relations are the cornerstone of the international order these days. And we see that at some point, maybe US cannot afford more aggressive, assertive policy towards Russia. So it's a big question how US is going to engage with Russia in vis-a-vis when you have Beijing and Washington kind of rivalry, which is heating up. And it also can affect indirectly Central Asian region. So it's a kind of a binding, it's a balancing process for Central Asian republics, how to engage with US, but at the same time, how to strategically engage with China and Russia, which are neighboring states. So I hope that at least those big stakeholders are going to find a compromise on their disagreements, and we can kind of work properly towards our cooperation. Speaking about the kind of another challenge and security issue that is very important is Afghanistan. Uzbekistan is doing very great steps towards that direction, and US strategy is pointing Afghanistan as one of the main pillars of its strategy towards Central Asia. There are some difficulties, big difficulties in terms of the peace talks which are happening. The political rivalry inside Afghanistan is still there, but I hope that at some point you can find some agreement between the political elites in Afghanistan. And China is also entering into the new spheres of kind of engagement in Central Asia, specifically military and security aspects, providing some security assistance to the border with Tajikistan and other neighboring countries. So you see that the process is going on, and we see the new steps from the main stakeholders in the region. And finally, what is quite interesting is that it's not only about the big states which are concerning, where the Central Asian are being concerned, where the competition between big states is leveling up. It's also about regional powers that are playing much more important role, and specifically recently in the Middle East, it really affects us in terms of the oil prices and possibly the build-up of the first Arab atomic station in Arab Emirates can kind of trigger a new nuclear dimension of Middle East politics, and at the same time it leads us to nuclear rivalry between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, etc. So it also can affect the oil prices. And in this respect, it can indirectly affect Central Asian republics, which are specifically Kazakhstan, which is quite related to the oil prices. In final words, I would like to say that cooperation in Central Asia is growing up, but we still need to understand that there is still big room for improvement. And cooperation with our partners from Azerbaijan and Georgia in the Caucasus is very important. Specifically with Azerbaijan, there are many business projects which are going on, and in the Caspian Sea with Georgia as well. So I believe that we need to look at the quality of cooperation and gradually develop them to the new level. There is no kind of time to rush. It's a learning process for us. So I believe that we need to work closely, specifically on the quality of cooperation.
Good. Thank you very much indeed for that. I guess if you don't mind, I'll just comment that I worry about terms like stakeholders in reference to outside powers. I think we made clear that for the US, our interests are engaged in the sovereignty and the cooperation among the states of the region. When we start talking about stakeholders, the next thing we're to start to talk about is spheres of influence. And I know you don't want that, and we don't want that. So we have a very strong preference for protection of sovereignty, support for the independence and independent decision-making of the states in the region. We are optimistic, I think, these days about prospects in Afghanistan for peace talks. We're clearing away the last couple of obstacles. So quite right to discuss Afghanistan in this context as well. We can have a talk another time about whether it's a Central Asian state or not. I know there's discussions about that. Thank you. If we can now, we'll turn to Akramjan Nemetov, who is the first Deputy Director of the Institute for Strategic and Regional Studies under the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan. So, Mr. Nemetov, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this dialogue. I'm very glad. It's a great pleasure for me. And yes, the development of cooperation with the Caspian states is one of the priority directions of Uzbekistan's foreign policy. They are interested in giving new dynamics to these ties. The entry of Uzbekistan to the Cooperation Council of Turkic-speaking countries opened a new stage in the further development of cooperation with the countries of the Caspian region. In our opinion, strengthening cooperation dictated by the presence of common cultural and historical roots, coincidence of strategic interests, complementary nature of economies and transport communication connectivity. In addition, there are common tasks in the field of security, fighting against terrorism and drug trafficking. These and other factors of a transboundary nature dictate the need to combine joint efforts of the countries of the Caspian region and Central Asia. Because of the time pressure, I want to stress the main areas of cooperation which are important for Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan is especially interested in expanding cooperation in the area of transport, since this will help overcome the transport isolation of the region. The usage by Central Asian countries, the transit potential of the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway will allow diversifying transport directions and entering new markets. In turn, for the South Caucasian states, the territory of Central Asia can become kind of a gateway providing access to China and South Asia. In the future, the construction of the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway could be one of the important links of the East-West International Transport Corridor, which was initiated at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Bishkek on June last year by the President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, and by the President of Kyrgyzstan, Soronbay Jeenbekov. The implementation of this project will not only expand the transit potential of the Central Asian region, thereby increasing rail traffic between Asia and Europe, but also integrate in the Trans-Afghan Transport Corridor, the key links of which can be promising Termez Mazar-e Sharif, Kabul Peshawar, and Termez Mazar-e Sharif Herat railways. On the other hand, they will increase the transit capacity of the North-South International Transport Corridor. And on the other hand, they will involve Afghanistan in the forming of regional transport routes, which will undoubtedly serve as another important factor in stabilizing the situation in this country. The importance to fully realizing the transit potential of Central Asia is also evidenced by the fact that container traffic from China to Europe has increased by more than 40 times in the past 10 years alone. In general, the coronavirus crisis only once again emphasized the need for strengthening regional cooperation. In our opinion, in this case, the Caspian region has every chance of securing the status of a stable economic ring in the center of Eurasia and a place where international investment flows are concentrated. It's very important for the Caspian countries to minimize the effect of a possible disagreements and concentrate on the intensification and subsequent use of mechanisms of multilateral interaction, especially in the interest of joint response to common challenges and threats. In conclusion, I would like to once again thank you for the invitation to take part in this dialogue, We are always ready for an open exchange of views and various issues of bilateral and multilateral cooperation. I hope that our current meeting will contribute to the solution of existing problems and give an incentive for further mutually beneficial cooperation, both among the states of Caspian region and with the countries of Central Asia. Thank you very much.
Sir, delighted to hear from you, delighted to see Uzbekistan taking a position of leadership, and thank you especially very much for focusing on the ongoing issues that confront the states of the region and the United States, drugs and counterterrorism, as well as the note of optimism about the potentials for east, west, and north-south transportation. We forget sometimes as Americans about the importance of rail. Thank you very much for reminding us. And I'll turn now to our next speaker, who I have as Ms. Christina Bell, who is the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Attaché to the U.S. mission to the European Union and to the Kingdom of Belgium. Ms. Bell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm so privileged to be here before you today. I've had the good fortune to be in the Caspian region, both kind of on the eastern side as well as the western side, and I'm just so honored to be here. So you might be wondering why would somebody from Customs and Border Protection be here on this panel, and what might I have to offer? So I'll just mention a couple of things. I'm very fortunate to be posted in Brussels. So physically, I'm situated right between the Caspian region and my homeland. So I think there are very interesting observations to also learn here on sort of the Western European side of things. And the other aspect that makes me very, very fortunate in my job is that Brussels is the home of the World Customs Organization. We have 180 plus members in the WCO, and the WCO serves to build capacity for partners, to share information on the customs front, to have academic settings. And in fact, my trip to Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan hosted a WCO academic setting where we talk about these strategic ideas in customs and borders. So I'm very, very fortunate to be here. So what I'd like to say before I get into some observations I have with respect to border security and customs is I'd like to congratulate Kazakhstan, who won the 2020 annual photo competition of the World Customs Organization. I have a link that I can share with the center, but it's basically the World Customs Organization website. And the winning photo shows a customs officer from Kazakhstan in his uniform alongside his faithful canine friend, ready to start the day despite the risks of COVID, masked up, and a pretty cool photo. So I was pretty proud of Kazakhstan for that. So anyway, I would like to share 3 observations with this body. And again, this is the context of borders. It's strategic. It's not just for control and keeping things out, but it's also to enable the high-speed movement of legitimate travelers and legitimate trade. So to do that, we can also protect our countries and our homelands from threats such as the narcotics mentioned before, terrorism, and businesses that are bringing in cargo that aren't declaring things properly or trying to kind of evade the process. So I would like to share 3 observations that I've seen here in Brussels, looking at the European Union and COVID, and some observations in the context of border security. So I just want to share theme number 1, the EU travel policy, and that the relative uniformity and compliance of member states to follow this. Similar, it's not the same, but it's similar as with the United States. There are certain competencies that the states have, similar here as in the European Union. They could have created their own policies on the external borders. But I would note with this first observation that they largely followed the guidance of the European Union and the policy with respect to the external borders and letting people from third countries in. So that's observation number 1. Observation number 2 which is not as direct to border security, but certainly influences it because it's the COVID numbers and the results that are sort of informing countries on how should they open their borders to others or not. So I call it the fuzzy math notion. And so what we have found is that different member states of the European Union, just like many, many countries in the world, account for COVID differently. So I'll give you an example. There was a mortality methodology that listed Belgium as having the worst COVID-19 response among the region. So Belgium counted both confirmed and suspected deaths and mortality stats, not only deaths that have been directly linked to the virus. So people wondered, well, what is happening in Belgium? So it was I just simply point out to you that we all didn't count in the same way. So the third theme I'd like to just share with you is now that it seems that the second wave of COVID is among us, there seems to be a little more variation in travel policy, border openings or closures in the European Union. So the COVID cases is relatively low. We do see it ticking up, and I see it ticking up in my home country as well. So the United States and many other countries are currently not allowed for non-essential travel into the European Union. And it is going to be interesting what happens in the future. Obviously, this affects the economy. Even in the customs world, a lot of customs agencies are funded through fees that either the members of the trade or the traveling public pay. So there's certainly the economic outlook piece to this. So, Mr. Ambassador, those were my observations here. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here and how customs, border security, border police, we do tie into the national security picture, both in enabling positive flows of trade and travel, as well as protecting our homelands. Thank you, sir.
Grateful for that. Thank you very much, Ms. Bell. I was struck especially by your connection between movement on the one hand and protection on the other. Calls out again for increased and intensified consultation between states who share interests in both things across borders. And then secondly, quite right about the difficulties in understanding the scale of the COVID problem when we have a hard time figuring out how to count. Not quite sure what to do about that, but it certainly indicates what the issues are when it comes to making proper decisions based on questionable statistics. So it's something we'll have to continue to press on. Thanks for pointing it out. I'll turn now actually to your colleague of yours, and that's Andrew Breithaupt, who is the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Representative to the U.S. European Command. Mr. Breithaupt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. I've started my timer, so I will try to be on track, knowing that everybody will throw me off the stage with the big hook if I'm not. But also thanks to General Repass for the invite. Very excited, very near and dear to my heart as this region of the world, as I did my studies in the War College there, were my focus for a year. So I was very pleased to be invited. I want to take a second and maybe echo some of the points that were made by a couple previous speakers. Obviously, Christine and I are close friends for many years now, work in the same area. While Christina works in a U.S. embassy, I'm assigned to a combatant command, and my job is to advise the commander on all things border-centric as they may affect military activities within the U.S. European AOR that he's responsible for. So it kind of makes me a jack of all trades. I'm not just a few countries, but having some 50 plus countries, and my head is spinning trying to keep up with what everybody is doing at all the time in any of those countries. Adding a bit of historical precedence to it, recently did a little research on a white paper that I'd written, 2003 SARS, 2009 H1N1, 2015 Ebola. Collectively, those three events, epidemics, accounted for about 296,000 deaths. Just click over to Google today, just for the update, 735,000 deaths associated with COVID globally. If we contrast that to the 1918 Spanish flu, that encompassed some 50 million deaths. Obviously, we've already brought up the point of apples to oranges and how things are counted, but I think no matter how we slice those numbers, we can see the scope of these different problem sets and pandemics and how they're different. Interestingly enough, and Christina brought this out, one thing that's been pretty consistent with this, if we look at it historically and today, is even in pandemic events, border security movements continue to happen in respect to specific military entity assets. Take the 1918 Spanish flu. Military forces moved through Europe. Now, granted, they were later blamed for a large spread of the flu itself as returning troops came back to different parts of the world and back to the United States. But even in pandemic situations, national security remains a precedent or a primary point for countries. It continues to allow joint operations to some degree. They may be scaled back. Movement of forces continues to happen. And all those are cross-border activities that don't seem suspended by a pandemic, even historically speaking. Another one, a little different from history, we used to sequester trade items because we were worried they'd be transmitting viruses. We'd see them go into hold for 10 or 14 days. Today, the world trade is much faster, much more global. It's faster than what happened on ships that took weeks, and now we do it in hours on airplanes and a lot of fast-moving pieces. We're not really sequestering those goods or chattels or items anymore. We're actually allowing them to continue to move because science has allowed us to have those things able to continue to move because we realize the threat of virus spread is reduced by the items themselves. It's associated more to people. So we'll tend to see, even in a pandemic, the movement stops on persons, but trade seems to continue, national security interests seem to continue, military activities seem to continue, and as Christina pointed out, there's even carve-outs under the EU and US proclamations that limit travel, that allow for service members, air crews, ship crews, diplomats to continue to move. I thought our colleague at the beginning made a good point about webinars are good to a point. However, I will tell you in the seat that I sit in, the interactions that I have with 3 countries I have focused with are definitely suffering from the pandemic. We can do so much on webinar, but at the end, I think diplomacy is showing the willingness to go to someone's office at their host country or at their embassy and have the discussion and create a relationship. So while diplomacy and diplomats are able to travel for official reasons, the diplomacy that happens, like you brought up, sir, behind the scenes, after the meeting, the dinner, the other things that occur, those things are suffering now. And I think we'll see in the long term an effect, how it's affecting our ability to actually continue to move forward. I know since I have come into my position, everything I have done the last 6 months has been COVID. All of my diplomacy projects have stalled. I've tried to sustain them, maintain them. So there is an effect on diplomacy by a pandemic. And I think this is global. It doesn't matter what country we sit in. I think I'll pause there because my timer shows me I'm under a minute. I can be verbose from Alabama sometimes, and I'll step back and wait for the question and answer. But thanks for the opportunity, sir.
So great to have you on. 100% take the point about the ins and outs of diplomacy and maintenance. I think we're all just trying to do what can be done, including events like this very useful webinar. I was struck by your references to lessons from previous pandemics and previous concerns, public health concerns, and how they affect security operations. That's a useful point. I think honestly, we could all do with doing a little reading once in a while, because at least in some instances, this is not the first time that this sort of thing has happened. So thanks for that. So if I understand correctly, in our run of show, we are now joined by His Excellency Ellen Suleimanov, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan to the United States, and Mr. Eldor Tulyakov, the Executive Director of the Development Strategy Center of Uzbekistan. They'll join for the question and answer phase of this webinar, and I've seen several questions come in already. But I understand that perhaps the ambassador and the executive director would like to take a couple of minutes and say just a few words, and I'm not kidding, just a few words, please. Ambassador Suleymanov, welcome, and if you have a couple of thoughts you'd like to share, we'd be happy to hear them.
Good morning. Thank you very much, and good evening to our colleagues in the region. Congratulations to CPC for putting together once again a nice seminar. Thank you very much. My special welcome to and thanks to Mr. Haji for joining from Baku. I know it's a different time, so good evening to all of you, our friends in the region as well, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. I want to thank Dr. Cooper for her very good overview and also for her support to Azerbaijan. I know that recently there was an increase in maritime security cooperation, and that's why we're very grateful for that. And we're also very grateful for the contributions made by the World Customs Organization. So Mrs. Bell's words on that are very valuable. I want to say that connectivity matters a lot. I want to second what Mr. Hajiyev said, that we want to see an expansion of C5+1 format. I mean, the Central Asia policy extended by the United States recently presented talked a lot about connectivity and the C5+1, sorry. But it never mentioned how do you get there. The way to get to Central Asia is to Georgia and Azerbaijan. I think that should never be overlooked. There are also a couple of other things which I think are very important at this moment. First of all, I want to thank our American colleagues on support on the COVID-19 pandemic relief. I mean, this is very grateful from USAID. Mr. Hajiyev also pointed out the special session of NAM, non-alignment movement. What I want our colleagues to take a look at is how NAM has changed. Non-alignment movement is no longer just about ideology and politics, but it is about practical implications of working together in the multilateral institutions. I think that's a reflection of Azerbaijan's leadership, and that's an important, significant change within that organization, which opens up much better avenues for cooperation with others, including Western nations. I think that is something we need to remember as well. Same with the Turkey Council. We had a follow-up meeting here to the first ever format of online meetings in the region. We had one here among the embassies and of the Turkey Council. So I would invite our American friends to engage with the countries of the Turkey Council, which includes, of course, nations such as Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan as an observer, to work together in maybe creating a more efficient, flexible formats. Those are important things for the region. Now, I know there were several questions asked.
Right. Ambassador, could I ask you with we just hear from our other colleague from Uzbekistan, and then we'll go right into Q&A, if that's all right, sir. Thank you. With that, Eldar Tuliakov, the Executive Director of the Development Strategy Center of Uzbekistan. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I am first of all grateful to Caspian Policy Center for organizing this event and inviting me to be part of it. Special thanks goes also to those who are contributing to the event. I am very much pleased to see you all. Since we're talking about the implications for security policy and regional cooperation in the COVID era, I would like to say a few words about the security measures taken in Uzbekistan with that regard, because we know very well that all the other countries had to take certain measures to combat COVID on time, and the Central Asian states also were among those who took active measures to combat COVID and protect its people. Maintaining the health of the nation was set as a priority, and as such restrictions were first of all introduced in movement, both inside the country and outside. So thus border control and maintaining peace in border regions is very essential at this situation. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, officials of Central Asian countries urged the public to unite and not to panic, maintain security. And we can say that as for Uzbekistan, even measures were taken to ask the media not to disseminate false information. In the meantime, special channels were established within a short period to disseminate reliable information on the current status concerning the pandemic. people have been constantly informed by all means. And just like many other countries, Uzbekistan also has closed air and road connection with all foreign countries since March 16. Later, railway connection was also restricted. So many other measures were taken to avoid mass events. So even the employers obtained a possibility to transfer employees, especially pregnant women, the elderly, people with disabilities, and those suffering from chronic disease with their consent to the remote work, flexible or home-based work. I should say that it has been a good practice, that regular exchange of experience in humanitarian assistance between neighbors have been shared. Moreover, regular exchange of phone calls of the leaders of Central Asian states to fight against COVID together and work out joint measures to ease the consequences of the pandemic has also shown the sign of established strong relations and perspectives for a better shared future. Concerning opportunities and need for bolstering regional and broader international cooperation, we can say that pandemic was sudden and unexpected. Therefore, all countries have to deal with it using extraordinary measures and constantly taking lessons from their experiences in this sphere and improving thereby their policies. So did Uzbekistan. We believe Central Asian countries should continue with positive practice. One of the major lessons is that we are facing the big wave of labor migrants returning home, and therefore must take this into account for future national development strategy as well as regional cooperation. We believe regional cooperation has huge potential. Such events as Sardoba and Sok, which occurred at the peak of pandemic, showed that despite difficult and nervous time, neighboring countries can resolve any border problems peacefully and in friendly atmosphere. This is also a sign of integration, which must be continued, we think. Integration means increasing dependency on each other. As such, in this case, each Central Asian state will be even more interested in preserving security in its territory and in the region. These measures should serve to bolster stronger regional cooperation. For that, we should continue integration processes at all levels, be it economic, legislative, cultural, or others. As a result, acting together will make it easier to overcome common global and regional challenges like combating terrorism, drug trafficking, and human trafficking, ensuring border security. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much indeed for that. Take the point. You were being so substantive that I wanted to hear more. Perhaps as we move into Q&A, feel free to respond. I see we have 9 questions here, and I'm prepared to start. I will look to the organizers to tell me if this is the right time. Absent other instructions, what I will do, I think, is read out the question, and anybody on the panel, including our 2 guest panelists, should feel free to respond. And if we get through all questions, great, but otherwise, happy to hear others' opinion. So I think I'll start with a question about whether the COVID-19 pandemic crisis is acting as an inhibitor or an accelerant to greater regional connectivity, whether economic or governmental. We've heard from Mr. Breithaupt about how difficult, and from Clark, about how difficult it is to conduct diplomacy virtually. But I do wonder whether the COVID-19 has kind of woken people up and caused them to push forward with even greater efforts at connectivity. So I'll open that question to the panel. Thank you. And if nobody raises their hand, I will nominate somebody.
Well, Ambassador, I'll make one comment just since you mentioned my namesake in there. I think from a government perspective, at least in the US government, we have a ton of technology. What we are seeing is we're stumbling into figuring out how to use it as a government. Cisco, WebEx, Zoom, go down the list, the Microsoft Teams. So it's always been there. We've given ourselves a crash course on how to do it. And as we figure that out, I kind of see us settling into a rhythm, but we're about 6 months into it, at least as my agency sit. But I will point out that across agencies, each agency, at least in the US government, seems to settle on a way to communicate. And sometimes they clash with the other agency and it still creates problems. And I can only imagine that's the same as we go across international borders as well.
Somebody from the region, possibly. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Other thoughts from somebody in the region? We heard a lot of good discussion about connectivity efforts in the region, 100% support. Wondering how you're doing on that and whether the pandemic crisis has provided greater motivation or greater inhibition. So I invite somebody from the region, including our diplomatic representatives. Go ahead, please.
I believe that this emergence of COVID-19 hasn't dramatically changed the way how we operate, but it certainly accelerated the processes, the future has come even earlier than we expected, actually. So we transformed in a fashion that, for example, G20 was held online. It is expected that UN General Assembly is going to be online as well. The traditional diplomatic handshakes and the sideline talks are going to be limited. Zoom diplomacy, we now hear the new term as Zoom diplomacy, etc. So
I like it.
We see that the new trends are emerging, but at the same time, the traditional way how, for example, C5+1 was held on the 30th of June. This year, that we had today a meeting between the 5 Minister of Foreign Affairs with Japanese representative. So the connections are still going on, but it's maybe the different dimension. So it's a digital dimension rather than a physical one. So there are some challenges, and no state in the world was prepared actually for the spread of COVID-19. What we had to do is just to adjust to the new reality. We had to maybe reform the way how we are operating in our daily life. It affects our habits. We wear masks. Certainly the government bodies and government institutions had to change and maybe improve at some point. It gives a new impulse to increase the level and quality of the service that we provide to the people. So in that respect, the future has come earlier than we expected, and we need to deal with that.
Thank you. Other thoughts on that topic? No. So another question is, and I think in light of the comments from Uzbekistan about the importance of transportation and the potential for movement of goods and people, I wanted to pass on a question as well about the new Russian port on the Caspian Sea, and how people see that as affecting transportation operations and perhaps even within the political or the geopolitical context as well. So again, anybody from the region has thoughts on that, we'd be happy to hear them. Perhaps our colleague from Uzbekistan could respond to that, since it was he who brought it up, or who focused on the question of transportation.
Yes. In short, taking into consideration that Uzbekistan is a double landlocked country, one of the two, of course, having more opportunities to deliver goods, to transport goods in import operations gives good potential for Uzbekistan to go to the world markets and bring world markets to Uzbekistan. Therefore, we should take into consideration that Uzbekistan's foreign policy is multivectoral, which means we are establishing cooperation. Although we set a high priority to cooperate with Central Asian states as a priority, we are not limiting ourselves only with Central Asian countries. We are going beyond. Therefore, having an opportunity to transfer products and goods, having additional opportunity, of course, is an advantage for Uzbekistan. And this will make the life of Uzbek people, the life of the people of the region easier, which means it will have a direct effect on the cost of the products brought from this new port if we succeed. Therefore, it's a good opportunity, I guess, and it should contribute only for the good of the people of the region.
Grateful for that, sir. Thank you. Does anybody else have a thought on that port and its role in the region? None heard. I will ask, sorry, Mr. Hajiev, at the risk of putting you on the spot, sir, we have a question that seems particularly perhaps appropriate for you, and it reads as follows. After the July incidents to which you referred on the Azerbaijan-Armenia international border, Russia has been flying weapons to Armenia. Why is this happening? Is Russia testing what it can do while the world is distracted by the pandemic? Mr. Hajiev, if you have thoughts on that, we'd be happy to hear them.
Yes, sorry, I have received a phone call.
Yeah.
Thank you for returning to this issue, particularly with a border incident that happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and particularly during the pandemic. And would like to reiterate once again, our good friend Luke Coffey described the Ganja Gap, particularly as a region where east and west corridor runs through very in close proximity of the Tabriz region of Azerbaijan. And according to our strategic risk assessment, one of the goals of Armenian side was indeed to pose a threat to the east and west corridor, and particularly oil and gas infrastructure projects of Azerbaijan. And also one of the goals that pursued by Armenian side to deflect the attention from the internal political and also social economic situation. But once again, this incident demonstrated that it's not a sporadic act. It's a part of the wider strategy pursued by Armenia. It once again underlines the urgency for redoubling of our efforts for the resolution of Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict that can pose a serious threat to wider Caspian Sea region and also seriously undermines peace and security in the Caucasus region. And as regards the Minsk group process for the resolution of the conflict, of course, we have a strong expectation from all co-chair countries, Russia, United States, and France, to streamline further their activities and their actions within the Minsk group process so that to push negotiation process forward. Unfortunately, we don't see any tangible results as a result of this almost 30 years negotiation process that's taking place. But currently we have the escalation of the situations, and more or less the situation is stable, but still we have exchange of fires along the line of contact that exists between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And here, my good friend Laura Cooper mentioned border security cooperation between the United States and Azerbaijan and in our wider region in her introduction. And also particularly to highlight Azerbaijan's strategy to demilitarize the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan also deployed its state border service along the border area. It's yet another intention of Azerbaijan's side to have a more demilitarized, more also de-escalation in the border area, but also capacity building projects supported by the United States for Azerbaijan border services increase their potential to fight against an illegal trafficking along the east-west and north-south axis, and also provide wider security in the Caspian Sea area. And also, we also have to appreciate by the United States government support to Azerbaijan within in the fight against COVID, and USAID rendered support to Azerbaijan. It's in a process that countries should come together and support one another, and we appreciate this support as well.
Good. So thank you very much indeed for that. I've tried to combine a couple of questions here, and here I'll turn to my Department of Defense colleagues. The questions have to do with how does the United States see C5+1 in the post-COVID-19 environment? Could, for example, it be expanded to include Azerbaijan and Georgia? Is there interest in focusing some of the efforts of the group, whether C5+1 or C7+1, on pandemic planning? Are you thinking about that already? Clark or Ms. Cooper, if you're there, we'd be happy to hear from you on either of those, or on sort of that combined topic.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I think basically on the C5+1 issue, I'll start off by saying that when C5+1 was kind of initially being thought about, I have to say I was a bit skeptical about its overall utility. My view on that has shifted over time, and actually what I've been seeing is that the forum has actually provided for not only better dialogue between the United States and the Central Asian states, but it's also, I think, helped to facilitate intra-Central Asian conversations absent the United States. I think actually we've seen the countries acting more like members of a region with common interests, as opposed to wholly independent actors who weren't working together. So I think there's some positive things to that. To the point, I want to say to the point on this one that we had a trip planned out where our secretary was going to be going out to be visiting the region and was going to be in Uzbekistan. And one of the events that we had planned was a Central Asian defense ministers conversation under kind of the C5+1 concept. It wasn't a formal C5+1 event, but the idea behind C5+1 was driving that. And I think there are going to be opportunities for that in the future. I think in terms of expanding groups, I'm always a little hesitant, you get too big and then nothing can happen with it. But I think there are places where there's some common interest back and forth across the Caspian Sea, obviously in the trade area and security areas where there could be benefits. I'll defer over to Laura on her thoughts about how the two regions might better coordinate kind of on the diplomatic front. But I think it's got potential, yes.
Good. Ms. Cooper, did you have thoughts, if you're still there?
Sure, yes.
Thank you.
If you can still hear me.
I gotcha.
Just one takeaway for me from some of the comments today from the panelists really is the importance of multilateral fora. To be quite candid, this is not something that occupies my day to day. I tend to think in terms of bilateral relationships. I tend to think in terms of maybe trilateral cooperative arrangements. And then in the defense domain, obviously we do a lot of work through NATO, and that's our premier international institution, but we do a lot of exercises where we bring in multiple partners at once. But these various constructs that have been discussed today, I think really are worth examining further, and examining from an economic integration perspective, but also from some of these transnational threat issues that we've been talking about that relate more closely to border security and transportation related issues. I agree with Clark that, I do get concerned when the group gets so large and the focus becomes so much a formal focus as opposed to practical projects. Sometimes the groups can lose relevance over time. We've had a few groups that over time have had an arc of relevance, and then it's easy to lose interest among senior leaders. So my suggestion, and I'm happy to take this back as well, is for us to look collectively for practical opportunities for issue-focused gatherings and groupings where we're trying to advance a specific initiative, and we are trying to break down the barriers. I mean, just like it's important for my team to be talking to Clark's team on a regular basis, we have this geographic seam in the Defense Department. It's important for the countries of the region to be talking to each other. So thank you for that inspiration today.
Good. Thank you both very much for that. I just have to echo from my own experience as well. In fact, I remember a meeting in Almaty once where we were working with the C5+1 on several different topics. And at a certain point in the meeting, I suddenly realized that the United States was becoming much less relevant, you know, to the discussions of the C5 themselves. And boy, was I happy about that, you know, that this connectivity between the states, the recognition of shared interests among them was driving them toward closer relations that wasn't depending on us jumping up and down and organizing meetings. Great thing. I do like Ms. Cooper's phrase here, arc of relevance. You know, what a great phrase. I'll be stealing that one a lot. So thanks very much for that. It's good to stay on the right side of the arc of relevance. I have another question here that's quite sophisticated. So I'm just going to read it out. So how has the pandemic affected multi-vector foreign policy for the region with the wider world? And then there's some explanation here. Has there been a contraction of interest by countries and blocs like the United States, EU, India, or et cetera? How does this affect foreign policy considerations in the region vis-a-vis Russia and China? So to summarize that in my primitive fashion, so do people in the region see that, let's say, the United States, EU, India have sort of backed away or not paying sufficient attention to the region and in light of the pandemic? And how does this affect the regional states' foreign policy considerations with regards to Russia and China? Complicated, but important. And on that, by the way, I think we'd all be happy to hear some advice. What should we be doing about that? So again, I'll turn to the region here. Maybe this is a question for a diplomat. Ambassador Suleymanov, would you like to take a swing at this, sir?
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you once again. I wanted to second something which many of my colleagues said here. And especially I want to thank Dr. Cooper for pointing out the issue-based approach and the necessity to focus on practical cooperation. In fact, that's what has been happening in the region. I mean, if you look at cooperation on connectivity, energy cooperation, and all this, the region is working on its own with itself. But it is true that the pandemic has slowed the attention, global attention to our region. It's no longer engagement is not at the same level. That's an important factor. I don't know how it affects foreign policy, but there's something which Mr. Hajiyev pointed out, which we need to understand. There was on July 12th, when there was an Armenian cross-border attack against Azerbaijan, what happened was there was a moment of truth there. There was a clear messaging. It happened 3 months before the completion of Southern Gas Corridor, which is opening the doors for the entire region, not only for Azerbaijan, for the entire region to Europe in terms of connectivity. As someone asked in a recent question, Armenia has been resupplied by Russian military supplies over Iranian territory very intensively over the last couple of weeks. Now, the question is, what is the Western strategy? Mr. Hajiyev pointed out that the American engagement in the Minsk group has kind of slowed down, and Russia has been leading the Minsk group negotiations for the last year or so. What it means is it also means that there is less chance for peaceful cooperation in the region, which actually, when in terms of pandemic, shows you that you do want to have sustainable states, you do want to have established cooperation in the region, but as a result of solution of the conflict, not despite it, because it doesn't work. Because any moment you focus on a pandemic, what happens? You turn your back trying to address your people's needs, and then you get attacked. So the lack of, it's not the lack of attention so much, it's not a clear strategy. What is the strategic engagement from the West to the region. How do we want to see that? Because the Americans and the Europeans have supported and engaged with all of our nations, especially with Azerbaijan and Georgia, in terms of the energy projects, be it Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan project, be it the Southern Gas Corridor. They have supported it to the point where we're now succeeding in enormous ways. We're opening up the Trans-Caspian versus fiber optic connection, which is very important. And on this, by the way, we want to see a more engagement on the United States to support this kind of cooperation as well. But when those projects, those initiatives, those Western interests, which are also there, come under threat, a direct threat as a matter of a military intervention, what is the US view? What is the US strategy? How are we going to get engaged? And that is a very important thing. And it's not limited to Azerbaijan and Armenia. This is not just a small skirmish there. It sends a message to everybody. I mean, think about the people in our colleagues in Central Asia looking at this and saying, how will the West react? What is the security and the future of all these corridors, to which for years since our independence, the United States, on a bipartisan matter, as a matter of fact, has committed so much effort and political credit. So I think that is those are things which we should keep thinking. By the way, one area which also we forget, that the overflight corridor to Afghanistan also goes over the region of Tovuz, which was attacked. So that's an important factor as well. And Afghanistan becomes a growing regional issue. And as the United States withdraws, increasingly our nations take lead on Afghanistan. Take a look at Uzbekistan's success. Uzbekistan has been a very important player there. Kazakhstan has been very important. We work with Turkmenistan to build connectivity to the Lapis Lazuli corridor. So there is a leadership from regional countries. We congratulate our friends in Central Asia on this. Sure. But we need to see what the US strategy is. That's very important.
Got it. So thank you very much indeed. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're getting close to the end. So look, I'll just take a moment to say thank you very much to everybody involved, particularly our friends in the region. You've gotten me fired up to get back to the region as quickly as possible. Clark, Laura, let's figure that out, okay? Good. Can I turn back to Afghan now for closing remarks, if any?
Ambassador, thank you very much for excellent moderation. And I'd like to thank all our speakers from the State Department, from the Department of Defense, and Ambassador Suleymanov, Hikmet Hajiyev from Baku, our colleagues from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. I here also want to reminisce our visit to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan with our colleagues from CPC last year. And we met the speakers that we have here today during that trip. And I'm glad that we are continuing our discussions. I also want to thank General Repas for putting this webinar together. He made great efforts, and I'd like to thank also my CPC colleagues, also Akboda, for her efforts as well. I also want to reminisce one comment made by Ms. Cooper, was that, Dr. Cooper, let me correct myself. She said that we need to have issue-based formats for the region to advance our connectivity and cooperation in the region. Here at CPC, we have established multiple platforms, including Trans-Caspian Forums, Caspian Business Forums, and we hope to continue issue-based discussions with our colleagues in the region. And hopefully we can grow our partnership in the format of corridors, cooperation, and connectivity, which we say 3 Cs basically. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us from the region, from the United States. And I would like to mention that among all our panels, this was the one that attracted the most attention. We have a lot of registrations, a lot of attendance that I can see from the count. Thanks everyone, and hope to see you again in our future events.